Jimmy Unchanged here of Unchanging fame. It has been 112 days and some hours since I last uploaded a long form video to this channel, and today I want to discuss a movie. More specifically, a substance. Ooh. Boom! See, up until this past year, I wasn't really interested in horror movies. I didn't really care for them. I thought they were all like slasher flicks that, well, were ultimately about like hormonal teens wanting to get laid and then getting killed for their crimes and sins and so on and so forth. Like, I mean, it's Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers and then your Terrifiers and so on and so forth. I remember one of the first horror movies I didn't see, but I saw at a Redbox. Remember those things? Was about this killer clown, and I was just like, why do I want to be scared? I was also like 8 at the time, so I wasn't really that interested in horror movies, even though arguably one of the most impactful movies of my young adult, not even young adult, my adolescence was The Gremlins, which is arguably a horror movie in itself. But regardless, I wasn't a big fan of the horror genre until I got some promptings by my dear good friend Brandon who knows what, and another YouTuber who I have no relations with, Super Eye Patch Wolf. They kind of both work together to get me interested in horror. And so I decided to look into it and see what there could be of horror. The psychological horror, the body horror, the social horror, and kind of get a breakdown and understanding of why people love it so much beyond just the stupid stabby, as one does. In comes The Substance, a 2024 feminist horror movie that deals with aging and perceived value of a woman in entertainment and society. So I watched the movie, though I didn't watch it until this year. I'm really bad about actually going to see movies in theaters. I oftentimes remember I want to go see it after their theatrical run's already done, and I was like, huh. So in watching the movie, I have to say, I was not disappointed. However, I did feel that the film left some elements to be desired. A film that makes a statement of a patriarchal society where the only value and validation one receives is if the woman is busty, beautiful, and smiling. Where the elements of horror develop to a feverish pitch, but it makes its thesis and then dips, choosing instead to become a schlocky slasher horror film. It ultimately became what I was fearing of a horror movie, but I kind of didn't care by that point because the first half of the movie was good. The movie, though, had a lot more style and pizzazz than I was expecting, and rightfully so. It's a beautiful movie. All in all, it did make me want to do some more reading after the fact and figure out more so what was going on and why the movie felt how it felt. And let me just say, I found answers. So let's talk about that. Oh my goodness, I sound like every other YouTuber. How am I ever going to do anything out of life? Alright, let's do this. So the story is quite simple. Elizabeth Sparkle, an aging Hollywood starlet, who won an Oscar early on in her career and got a Hollywood star, which I don't think those two are connected. I think you can get a Hollywood star without winning an Oscar and vice versa. But anyway, it's symbolism. It's a film. It's not real. It's not real. Elizabeth Sparkle, who is the most porn star name I've heard since a porn star, decides to take an illicit drug that she gets recommended by this doctor. Man, that's really funny sentence to say when you don't understand the context of how it comes about. Decides to take this illicit drug called The Substance to keep her run in the limelight going because she has been ousted from her company and it now is, I guess, on the out and out. She's 50 years old. She's aged up. She's done. She's dry meat. She's no longer an object for success or something. Through this choice to take this drug, The Substance, a neon green Mountain Dew concoction, she begins to experience dissociations and a growing distaste for how she lives her life. As the newer, younger, better version of herself, aptly named Sue, she begins to use the old body that she had as Elizabeth to keep this young body alive and fresh. See, the movie has the intention of the substance, obviously, it acts as a way to create this younger version of yourself, but it also has a side effect, side element as well, that you need to take spinal fluid from the original body to keep the young body from like just blowing up and decomposing. So she has to do that, and as Sue, she begins to despise the time as her old body more and more. She begins to just use up the body a lot. As she becomes more and more enamored by the praise and fame, she moves up in the studio, even more so than she did as Elizabeth. So she's like on a new high. She's like, yes, I'm doing it. But in doing so, she has created her original body to be this golem, grotesque, haggard creature. And one day she has to switch back. And in switching back, when she comes into her original body, she is disgusted with what she's done to herself as Sue, and decides that she needs to kill the Sue body. So she gets the termination substance and starts to terminate the Sue body. She ultimately can't go through with it and decides to resuscitate the Sue body. But in so doing, she ultimately brings Sue back to life with her not in her body. And then there's just there's a scene that's caused from this. Sue brutally murders Elizabeth. And then goes about her day. Then goes on to host this New Year's Eve show because she's been doing so well, which is that same night. So she goes to that, but at this show she starts to have migraines and things start not going well. She has to throw up, so she ends up throwing up some teeth. She pulls out some teeth. Her fingernails start falling out. Her ear falls off. So she decides she has to go back to her apartment and reuse the green Mountain Dew activator fluid, the substance. In so doing, she creates Monstro Elizasu. I think. Elizasu. Yeah, that. In this new form, she attempts to glam herself up before debuting for the New Year's Eve show. But upon being seen by the crowd, is violently rejected and attacked. Her head gets blown up. She flees the venue and then explodes on the sidewalk. Brain octopus Elizabeth then crawls out and dies, dissolves on her Hollywood star, finally free of the Hollywood objectification, as her blood brain matter is scrubbed away by a street cleaner. So first I want to discuss the horror of the movie and the substance. Like literally the substance that she takes. Because a lot of those movies' horror is body horror that's related to the substance and because of what she decides to take it on. The standout horror really comes from the initial scene of Elizabeth taking the activator fluid that we see the aftermath of it on the actual poster for the movie, the image of Elizabeth back sewn up. It's like absolutely gross and ugh. Also, I have questions about why they sewed it up that way, but besides the point. They decided, like, I feel like there are better ways. I can only assume it's because Sue doesn't know actually how to sew up the body, but like when I look at it, I'm like, this doesn't sit right. Have I mentioned I'm a Boy Scout? I'm an Eagle Scout, so that might also be why. Besides the point. So, in the movie, the activator sequence happens. There's a lot of imagery with the pupil splitting and becoming a new body, or a new eye, that Elizabeth's body is distorted and convulsed as she's lying on the floor of her bathroom. She gets her back split open, and the new body, which is, as she calls it Sue, comes out, or as the substance company refers to it, the other self, comes out of her body through her back. Her whole body's just left there oozing blood and pus and this green stuff. Gross scene. Absolutely love it. I should also mention this is going to be there's going to be more disturbing scenes, so if you don't like horror, I don't know why you clicked on this video. You know the Substance movie is a horror movie, so I don't know why you decided to pick this video to watch. anyway I'm going to discuss the horror elements. Like, what did you expect? I was just going to gloss over the fact that there's blood, guts, and gore. No. There's also a lot of stuff that occurs with Sue, where she'll have these vivid hallucinations of things going wrong with her body. This mainly only ever happens, if I'm correct, this only happens after she starts to abuse I don't remember what it's called, but the stabilizer fluid that's just spinal fluid that you have to inject to keep your other self alive. That only starts happening once she starts abusing it. But there's a great scene of this guy that she's making out with unzipping the back of her leather leotard and her guts just fall out. There's another sequence that actually dips into some social horror as well to me, and a lot more of the idea of a woman seeing how other people view her body. Like, that's throughout this entire movie, the theme of you aren't worth anything unless you're a sex object. Scene in question, though, covers that she hallucinates as she's going through this pump it up aerobics routine. She bends over and thinks she sees something pop like underneath her skin on her butt. So then she stops the scene and gets really self-conscious, like what was that? And then all of the people behind the camera that are running the scene or like shooting it and all that are like, oh, what's that? The director said we saw something. So then a bunch of men just come in and start to view the footage that they have of this, and like, oh, there's something here we need to see. They decide to go frame by frame, and this really upsets Sue because she's not really used to having her body viewed in such a meticulous detail. Now, maybe that's still technically body horror, but it felt more social horror to me because she was like, oh no, they're going to see I'm imperfect or something. They're going to see something bad happened. So she leaves the place and she's self-conscious of her body in that sequence, which is the only time as Sue we see her self-conscious of her body. We mainly get that with the Elizabeth character. She has this whole vivid hallucination where there's something in her body that she slowly moves up to her belly button and then pulls out a chicken wing out of her stomach, and it's like gross. No, like actually it's a really fun, but at first it's like, what is that? And then you notice it's a chicken wing and it has its skin, it's uncooked, it's like beautiful. I'm trying to figure out if it's an analogy for birth, but I don't think so. Well, when Elizabeth starts to abuse her original Matrix body to live in Sue's body for longer days, the first instance of this, she takes one more extra day, and when she goes back to her Elizabeth body, she noticed that her one finger is old, withered, gnarled, flaky, livery skin, and she's like, why is this happening? Which is really good prosthetics. It looks beautiful. But then what continues to happen is she, after a few days of living with the gnarled finger, she decides to go back as Sue and just suffer the consequences when she spends the days in her Elizabeth body. So we get to see as Elizabeth's body becomes more and more haggard, decrepit, and just gross. She starts to get gray hair. Half her face starts to age. The other half is fine. Really cool aesthetic, if you ask me. Her one entire, I think it's her left leg, I might be wrong, it might be her right leg, gets old, gnarly, and bony, and there's this sequence where she's stuck in her chair and she can't move it. So she has to almost break the knee to where it can move again. Like the bones got locked up, and that one was the one that got me because like blood is fine, but the issue of having to then like almost break your leg to get it to be able to move again, I don't like that. And I was like, oh, I don't like that one. And I've always not really liked the issue with bones because it's under the skin, you can't see it. I just don't like it. But yeah, so overall the horror of the movie is great. I like the elements that we get of seeing how Elizabeth's body is growing more and more decrepit until eventually she's turned into this golem-looking creature, which no longer looks scary. It just looks funny. But then we also get a lot of psychological horror as the young other body is having these moments of her body breaking down until eventually it does start to break down after she's killed Elizabeth. And those are some interesting ones as well because her teeth fall out, her fingernails pull out, her ear falls off. It's gross. I love it. Monstro Elizasu is very Cronenberg and a little too goofy for my taste, but I like the initial thought of it, that there's this horrific mass over Margaret Qualley. And I mean, kudos to her. She went through the actual radiation to get mutated to that extent. I think that's great that she would do that for this movie, especially this passion project. So I think that's really cool for her. Same with Demi Moore. Like, kudos to them. Like, I don't think I would do that. I don't know if I would go through radiation to become this monstrosity and meld with another person for just the sake of maybe 20 minutes and then get killed at the end. Like, they explode. Like, I think it's crazy dedication. So kudos to them. I think for that reason, the movie should win all 5 Oscars that it's been nominated for. Oh, I haven't mentioned that, have I? I guess I also just want to mention briefly the basis for the substance and the other self that comes out of it, out of you taking the substance. The company is really cool. The like style and theming of it is great, but the initial like aspects of it are pretty scary. You take this green fluid, you inject it into yourself, it then mitoses you to where you create another person out of your body that splits out of your back. And then you have to feed your other body with this fluid food that's just for the body, that for the week you spend in one body, you have to spend a week in the other, going back and forth, back and forth. You can theoretically spend as much time as you want in the original body, and it wouldn't affect the other body as long as you're feeding the other body, but you can only spend up to 1 week in the other self without the other body getting a decrepit, as I mentioned before. Oh, that's another thing. So there's a few scenes where, as Sue, Elizabeth Sue, is taking out the spinal fluid from the original Matrix body, and we just see a hole that she's been taking it out of is crusted over, scabbed, pussy. It's gross. There's a sequence where there's one shot where she can't like quite get it in because of how crusted over it is, so she has to try a little bit longer, and she's gagging, and it's pretty good. It kind of reminds me of when I had a wart. I think that's TMI. One of the things that I did see when I was doing my research afterwards, and is mentioned in the cut article by Emily Cood, she says, and I'll put it up on the screen so you can read it as well. Links to everything I mentioned and so on will be in the description. My absurd wish for this determinedly unsubtle movie was only for it to have leavened its relentlessness with more moments of precision. What a thoroughly chilling because familiar moment it would have been to have Elizabeth notice some minor changes in her pristine appearance, a stray, unruly gray chin hair, or the shock of a vein protruding on an otherwise smooth thigh. The process of aging naturally is disgusting. The movie seems to be saying, and of course the audience agrees, but pushing that cultural dictate to its most outlandish extreme seems ultimately superfluous when the truth is already horrific enough. The idea of being a woman that you're done, you're dried up, you're over with when you're 50. It was very much on the nose. The movie wasn't very subtle at all with its themings and messaging. And I mean, I've kind of rescinded with that thought and opinion as I've done reading after the fact, but I still I would kind of say that the movie would have done messaging better if it had been a little bit more subtle. But maybe that's the artisticness that I am hoping out of this movie. Monstro Eliza Sue is this horrific monster, very Cronenberg-esque, and it's absolutely hideous. It looks beautiful from a practical standpoint, but it's hideous looking. There's some... well, not some. There's a lot of monster just paint the room red blood. It's pretty fun. It's very over the top and funny. Like, at that point I was laughing. The movie was no longer scary, it was just funny. Though I would argue this movie was never really trying to be a thriller. It was trying to be a body horror with a lot of thematic overtones. So ultimately I don't see it as an issue when you actually are looking at it on its whole. So when we come to the themes of the movie, this is where, like I discussed the horror, the elements of Elizabeth, Sue, the body horror, the social horror. I've discussed a little bit about the patriarchal tone, the idea of what a woman's worth is, and now we come to the main discussion of it. Because when I was first watching the movie, I liked the first 2/3. I loved the theming, the story, and then it kind of went overboard, gaudy horror, and just went full slasher, schlocky. Well, slasher isn't the correct term, but it went schlocky horror. And for a while after watching, I just wasn't satisfied with that. I was like, and as I was reading earlier and reading other articles, a lot of people felt that the movie would have done better if it was more subtle, if it had been less overall, like grotesque and over the top. And that's not like a one-off thing. A lot of people felt that way. But then I've also read plenty of people that like when you come to the theme of what a woman feels and goes through and how they might feel about some stuff. In an Ellie article by Alexandra English, she says in regards to the Monstro Eliza Sue scene, to the women in the room, when Monstro Eliza Sue really is a creature of these men's own creation. She's a woman who has become a victim of perception drift, the phenomenon when someone has had so much cosmetic work done that they go too far because they cannot see themselves anymore. She's gone through hell to make herself young, to give us what we asked for, she says, and we turn around and call her a monster. We try to kill her. She already tried to kill herself. Anything you say to a woman about her appearance, she's already said to herself in infinitely worse ways. So that when I first read this article, I didn't initially have that thought when I watched it. The final scene felt over the top, gory, and not really relevant. I mean, earlier in the article, she was saying how other people have said the final 20 minutes you could have done without, and I was like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. And then she said says that as a woman you feel a deeper connection and meaning, and I'm like, maybe that is a thing that I just, as a man, I just don't encounter, and therefore I'm like, didn't grasp it, which I think is completely fair. I think there are elements of that sequence that, yeah, it's over the top, doesn't quite make sense, and it's kind of meant for people that get the scene and that feeling, which comes from the stuff I was reading about the director, Carolee Fagiat, or Fag. Oh, what's her name? Oh, Fargiat. I can't say that last name for the life of me. It's
Coralie Fargeet.
disgusting.
Coralie Fargeet.
So I think that's true. I think that's true because the themes are very much created from the director's point of view. Like when I was reading that about this and its background, this was a passion project. This was a movie built by her, and she wanted to do it. She gave up doing the Black Widow movie for Marvel for this, which ultimately I think is a good idea because that movie is no good. No bueno. Because this was more impactful than anything she could have done for mass market appeal. The people in this movie don't make much sense because there's a lot of Elizabeth is ousted from her entertainment, her aerobics class, and she immediately goes back to the same group once she's the new younger version of herself. That she doesn't try to do anything more with her life than be that sex symbol that she was in her youth. And I got really upset with her that she would view the people that were confining her to be you're only useful because you're attractive. Your only value is your attractiveness. And she was immediately going back to them as her source of validation. And it was only after I was reading about the director that I came to realize, no, I think it's because that's the way the movie is meant to be. The movie is supposed to be that there's this very narrow perception of, in Hollywood, women are only viewed that way. And that in a greater span of women and society, there can be more to that. I mean, obviously, if it was the only thing she could do was be a beautiful actress, then we wouldn't have female directors, we wouldn't have female creatives. But in the context of the movie, if you're in this cycle, this is how you're going to live your life. There was one plot point when I was watching the movie that I was annoyed they didn't do more with, which was she runs into an old friend from high school that still views her as attractive and beautiful and the greatest thing on the block, that is, I guess, in the context of the movie, still willing to interact with her even though she is past market value. She ultimately doesn't do anything with that line because by the point that she decides to follow up on that friend and go on a date with him, she has been living as Sue and can't take the steps of courage to go out and be seen as something that is not as beautiful as this younger, better version of herself. I mean, there's a great scene where she's trying to reapply makeup and then eventually loses it and smears it all up and then just doesn't go to the date. And I think that's ultimately what we see in the movie. That Elizabeth is so confined by this social feeling that she's so much in Hollywood, she can't see there's more value outside of what she can offer with her body. And I think that's ultimately what the movie is trying to get across, that as she is trying to live her life after the fact, she can't figure out how to live her life because she doesn't know any better. She doesn't see any other way because it's the only way she's ever seen. And I think that's what the movie is talking about. It's obviously a critique of the patriarchal view of women, that they're sex symbols and all of that. But there's a deeper understanding that if you grow up in this system, you're only ever going to view yourself in that system. And I think that's one of those things that is more value to the movie. So the final thing that I want to do in this final section of the video, talk about the director.
Coralie Farjeet.
See, she's a successful director. She directed a movie in 2017 called Revenge. I haven't seen it. But going off of that, she spent a few years working on the script and was able to pitch it to Universal, get them to fund it. In the process of making the film, she was given full creative control, able to do whatever and however she pleased with it. It was upon her showing the movie to the studio executives that they didn't like it, wanted her to change it, at least underneath the Universal distribution. They were still willing for a time to put it underneath Focused Films, but they weren't able to do that because of, I guess, the schedule that Focused Films had for release. They weren't able to fit it in. So they gave her the movie and were basically like, on your way. At this, she decided to put it into Cannes Film Festival in hopes of, if it's viewed there, hopefully she'll be able to find a distributor, someone to take it. There's a great article by Variety that's talking about her thought process beforehand, how she was feeling, and how that the movie is very much a reflection of how she felt growing up and living in. Now she's French. She didn't live in, or maybe she did live in Hollywood for a while, but that she grew up underneath this lens that she put herself in that allowed that kind of festered the themes of the movie that I just discussed. It was only when she was older that she was able to formulate it into a movie that was able to resonate so well with female audiences and audiences overall. I do see that there's a lot of contention between male and female viewers of the movie, and I agree. There are some elements, like I mentioned earlier, the Monstro Eliza Sue scene, that doesn't speak to me on any emotional level, but it speaks to women, and I think that's great. I mean, also, it's like there are elements of men and women that are different, so I'm not going to necessarily understand women fully. I don't think I ever will, and vice versa. I don't think women don't fully understand men and never will. So because of that, there are elements that I didn't grasp with. But through the reading of the articles, it gave me a deeper understanding of why the movie was how it was. And especially when I came to find that she had full creative control. She had full creative control. She chose to have the last 20 to 30 minutes be that schlocky horror fest. And I can only ascribe that to her being that she's a fan of horror. And she wanted to have horror. She wanted to give tribute to the movies that she had in her past. Throughout the movie, it's almost a homage and a reference to what she grew up, how the director grew up, and what she loves about film. That's even why it's an English movie, because she grew up on English movies, even though she's French. It's not technically her original language. But because she was so influenced by it, she was willing to make it that way. And I mean, it was able to appeal to even a broader audience than just European audiences, French audiences, that. So I ultimately have a lot more respect for the movie than I did initially, because I was like, well, this makes a lot of sense from a creative perspective. She wanted to make this movie this way, and so she did. She made it 2/3 really great psychological dichotomy, deconstruction of what it is to be a woman, dealing with like the ideas of aging and so on and so forth. But then she was also wanting to make a schlocky horror movie at the end. And I was like, yeah, okay, I respect it. So back to the little history lesson. It gets shown at Cannes. That's when I first became aware of it. That's when most people became aware of it. It got an 11-minute standing ovation, I believe. And it was picked up by distributor Mubi, where it was then shown in theaters in America and across the world. First movie Mubi's distributed to America, which is funny. It was able to get enough legs to have that run and eventually get nominated for Oscars. It got 5 Oscar nominations, and they are Best Original Screenplay, Best Actress for Demi Moore, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Director, and Best Picture. That's a substantial haul, and I think that's because the director was willing to do what she wanted. She says she made movies to be movies for Cannes, for the critic, for Oscars. And I mean, she's there. She's made a movie that got 5 Oscar nominations. And we see that reflected also with the cast. Demi Moore had a bunch of stuff that I wasn't even aware of. I mean, I knew she existed, but I don't even know if I've seen many of the movies. But she dealt with a lot of the similar things that the movie covers about, well, as you're aging, you don't have the same sort of value as you did in Hollywood. And it's just that so many different elements of the movie spoke to the cast that was brought about by the director. It's just fascinating. Ultimately, why I really like it. I mean, that's why I'm making a video. I wouldn't be making this video if I didn't feel strongly about it. I would recommend it to everyone. Oh, I did want to mention one final thing that I, on first viewing, didn't like, and then now, upon hindsight, I love, is the final sequence that takes place with the New Year's Eve show with Monstro Eliza Sue. The lead up to that is having a bunch of these female dancers, like peacock dancers, that are just naked, like full breasts, full buttock, the whole 9 yards, full frontal, all of that stuff, and it's showing in front of this audience. And at first I'm like, okay, interesting. I don't understand how this is going to be a TV show, or if this is just going to be a New Year's Eve show that isn't viewed. That might be why. That might be why. It wasn't actually going to be televised. It was just a show that the studio was putting on for people so you could go see it. I think that's why. But ultimately, what I first was like, why is this here, was there was this one mother with this girl that was dressed up just like Sue. And I initially was like, why would you bring a child to this? And then I thought further and further about it, especially after reading the article talking about Coralie and her thought process and why she created it. And I clicked. The movie was using that instance to be an indication of, as a child, you're shown this, that this is what you're attained to. This is what you're worth. And it's just the indoctrination of it, that as a woman, then this is what you're worth. And that Hollywood sphere, this is what you're worth. You don't have any other value. And I was like, oh my goodness. It all makes so much more sense. Now, to be fair, you could probably get a lot of this without watching the movie, or without reading about it. Without reading about the backgrounds of the actresses and the director. But that really just hit me. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. She is stuck in this loop where she's going to view these young women as idolizations of what it's to be a woman, and then she's going to want to become that, and then she's going to be stuck in the same cycle that Elizabeth was, where once you hit an age, you're out, and you're done. Godspeed. God bless. Peace.